Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Tokpo-Noborale, Team Lead, Institutional Trust and Loan Agency, Stanbic IBTC Trustees. I want to welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by Stanbic IBTC Trustees, where we'll be discussing the benefits of escrow in enhancing security in business transactions. We're hoping that by the end of this session, you'd have a good understanding of how escrows work and the inherent benefits of having an escrow on your transactions to ensure the security of your transaction. So now we'll be taking our opening remarks from our Chief Executive, Stanbic IBTC Trustees, Charles O'Meara. Charles, over to you.
Thank you very much, Temitope, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. Our webinar today is themed The Benefits of Escrow, Enhancing Security in Business Transactions. And it is a pleasure to see that you've taken some time out of your busy schedule to join us for this session, which promises to provide delightful insights into what you need to do to change the game this year. Today is an exciting opportunity for us to explore the advantages that escrow services offer in safeguarding the integrity and reliability of commercial dealings. In an ever-evolving landscape where trust and security are paramount, businesses are constantly seeking robust mechanisms to protect their business interests and ensure seamless transactions. The escrow service serves as a tried and tested solution, providing a secure net framework that instills confidence and minimizes risk for all parties involved. We will delve into the fundamental principles underpinning escrow arrangements, exploring how they act as neutral intermediaries, holding funds and assets until predetermined conditions are met, thereby mitigating the inherent risks associated with business transactions. Additionally, we'll examine the diverse scenarios in which escrows can be employed, from mergers and acquisitions to real estate transactions and intellectual property transfers and beyond. In addition to mitigating risks, escrow fosters an environment of trust and transparency, laying the foundation for fruitful long-term relationships among stakeholders. By providing a secure and impartial platform, the escrow service enables parties to engage in negotiations with a peace of mind, knowing that all their interests are fully protected and transactions are executed with precision and accountability. Our panel of experts will share their valuable insights, shedding light on best practice and emerging trends that will help give depth to our understanding of this critical aspect of business transactions. At the end of this webinar, I'm convinced that you would have gained a comprehensive understanding of the importance of escrow in enhancing trust and security in business transactions. Without taking more of your time, let us embark on this enlightening journey together. I encourage you to actively engage our speakers, asking them questions and sharing your thoughts. So once again, I welcome you to this session, and I wish you a productive and enjoyable time. Thank you very much for joining us. Temitope, back to you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Like you said, it's going to be an enlightening journey, and we're going to take you every step of the way. This session is going to be split into two parts. So the first part is our panel discussions, where we'll be getting insights from our panelists, and the second part will be the Q&A, where we'll be receiving questions and comments from the audience. And please feel free to use the reaction buttons at the top of the screen. Give us your thumbs up, give us your applauses. If you hear something that resonates with you or you're like, wow, this is interesting, please give us your reactions. Reaction button is at the top of the screen. So now I'll be moving on to the introduction of the panelists. We have two panelists, very able and knowledgeable panelists. We have Sheye Egbari and Olumuyiwa Okeleye. So Sheye Egbari is a seasoned professional and a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. She holds a BSc in accounting from University of Lagos and an MSc in HR management from Heriot-Watt University, Edinburgh Business School. She is the current head of the Institutional Trust and Loan Agency business, where she currently oversees the responsibility of providing trust and loan agency services to institutional clients. You're very welcome, Sheyi.
Thank you very much, Temitope.
Our second panelist is Olumuyiwa Okeleye. Olumuyiwa holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Archaeology from Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, a Master's degree in Archaeology with specialization in Cultural Resource Management from University of Ibadan, Master's in Managerial Psychology from University of Lagos. He's an institutional trust advisor with knowledge ranging from escrows, bond trusteeship, ESOPs, collective investment schemes, and bespoke trusts. Prior to joining Stanbic IBTC Trustees, Muyiwa has worked in Stanbic IBTC Pensions as a client experience specialist with over 6 years experience and ISON BPO International with over 2 years experience in customers relations. You're welcome, Muyiwa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Temitope. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you. So now we'll be moving on to the panel discussions. The burning question is, what is an escrow and how does an escrow help us to bring in security in business transactions? We all want to understand what an escrow is, and Sheyi will be helping us here. To explain what an escrow is, Sheyi, over to you.
Thank you, Temitope. Yes, what is an escrow? An escrow, in simple terms, is an arrangement where assets are held or kept by a third party on behalf of an initial party or initial parties, persons to a contract and returned or released to those parties upon the fulfillment of a predetermined condition or terms in an agreement. It could also be termed as a contractual agreement in which a third party holds funds or assets or documents in trust for primary transacting parties, pending the fulfillment of conditions agreed to the transaction parties or the transacting parties. So in a quick example, we have a buyer and a seller who don't really know themselves and are trying to, maybe the buyer is trying to buy a house from the seller, Mr. B. What would happen is that they can agree to involve an escrow agent, a middleman, to hold the transaction document and funds in that transaction. The buyer will be making a purchase price and the seller would have an asset, the property, and the documents to be kept with an escrow upon the fulfillment of predetermined terms and conditions. And that is what we'll do in an escrow transaction. Thank you, Temitope. Over to you.
Thank you. You've heard it from Sheyi. She's explained to us what an escrow is. Now I'll move on to you, Muyiwa. Why is an escrow service important in business transactions? Muyiwa, over to you.
Thank you, Temitope. So in every business transaction, the underlying factor to consider is the level of comfort that the transacting parties have in doing that business. Every business, of course, we know that it has its level of risk that will be considered. And so the escrow comes in to form a mitigant that provides a sense of security and comfort for the transacting parties, so that each party can go to sleep knowing fully well that there's a neutral third party that is able to protect both their interests in the transaction. So basically, that's the importance of the escrow in business transaction.
Okay, thank you very much, Muyiwa. Now to the next question. For those that are interested in, setting up an escrow, how does the process work? What steps are involved from start to finish if you want to set up an escrow? Sheyi, over to you.
Thank you again, Temitope. The processes involved in setting up an escrow include, first of all, we have to be appointed as escrow agents. Stanbic IBTC acts as escrow agents, and so we have to be appointed. The parties have to come together to mutually say that they want us to do this service or render this service to them. Secondly, another thing we do is to say to the parties, you might know yourselves, and even where you don't know yourselves, we need to do some form of due diligence around the parties. So we obtain documents around due diligence, KYC, know your customers. We collect documents. We also find out what the transaction is going to be about. If it's, for example, a joint venture arrangement that has the landowner and a developer, for example, developing a property or an estate, or just like I said earlier, a mere buying and sale contract, we collect documents and carry out due diligence. The third thing we do is that we also obtain underlying transaction documents, because an escrow is an offshoot of an underlying agreement. So we also obtain whether a sale, purchase, or a joint venture agreement. Fourth thing we do is to also review and draft. After reviewing all those documents we have, we also review the escrow agreement. So an escrow agreement sometimes can come from the parties, and where it doesn't come from the parties, we draft one and ensure that all the conditions and terms, duties of the escrow agent and everything are included. Then we also open an escrow account, because there are sometimes that initial deposits have to be made, and also this escrow account will be included in the agreement. So that is something we do with our bank. We open an escrow agreement. Another thing we also do is that another process that is involved is that after opening the escrow account, you also want to receive funds into the escrow account in line with the agreement terms. And then if you also have to receive the property document or receive other documents to be kept in an escrow by the escrow agent, we receive those documents. We continue to also work in line with the agreements that have been executed within the parties, and then we carry out a release. A release involves release of funds in line with transaction, or release of documents when the predetermined conditions have actually been met, and then we now close the escrow. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Shay, for that very detailed response. I heard you mention escrow agreement. Yes, please, can you tell us what an escrow agreement is, Muyiwa? And also, please tell us what the critical points to note in drafting an escrow agreement.
Right. Thank you very much, Temitope. So in an escrow transaction, the basic thing that all parties would be relying on or making reference to is the agreement. Because you know that in entering a business transaction with with a different party, you both have to agree on certain things. You as one party have certain expectation in that engagement. The other party has his own expectation, and so it's important that a document is drafted highlighting what the agreement is between the two parties. And in drafting that agreement, it's also important to know for the trustee to know that the extent to which the trustee will be able to intervene or manage that transaction is dependent on what has been highlighted in the agreement as the rule that a trustee can handle on that transaction. And so for us as in our role as trustees, this role has to be clearly stated, in the escrow agreement. Also, the obligation of both parties also has to be stated and must be within the limits of the law and jurisdiction. Now, the agreement must be reviewed by both parties and has to be signed off for it to be authentic as a document that will be binding on these parties. Now, other critical things to look out for in drafting the escrow agreement includes the competence of the escrow agent in administering the type of escrow, because of course in an escrow transaction you have different variances to the escrow. Also, the amount of funds to be escrowed has to be considered for you to be able to know if the trustee is has the capacity to manage warehousing or safeguarding that the funds. Then you look at investment. Do they have the expertise, or do they leverage on relationships that helps them to be able to invest the funds and advise accordingly? You have the length of the escrow, which also needs to be considered. There are escrow transactions or agreement that doesn't go beyond 2 to 3 months, while you have others that span for more than 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the nature of the transaction. You have the release of the escrow. It also has to be considered the conditions for the release, and the fees of the escrow agent. So in setting up an escrow, all these things are critical points that you need to be able to so that it informs your choice of who your escrow agent would be, and if you would need to go into that transaction with the other party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muyiwa, for a very detailed response there. So now thinking about timelines, what kind of timelines should we be looking at in setting up an escrow account, Shay?
Okay, Temitope, thank you for that question. I think Miwa had spoke in terms of timeline too, but this is really dependent on the escrow transaction type, and then the timeline can vary from days to weeks and months, from a period of 7 days to 2 weeks, or even 2 months, depending on the review period of the transaction documents, the provision of the KYC documents, maybe from the parties, and even contingencies and conditions that need to be met before the transaction can say kick started. So it really varies. But we've seen typical timelines of almost 2 weeks to set up the escrow, and which can run for a period of a year or 18 months or even 2 years, depending on the assets we are holding in custody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know we've been hearing about escrows. What are the common misconceptions about escrows, and how do we ensure that businesses have a clear understanding of the role and benefits of an escrow? Miwa, this question is for you.
Okay, thank you very much. So when we talk about misconceptions generally about the one of the things that we need to look at is the escrow, the misconception around the escrow arrangement being only for real estate transactions. Now that's actually a misconception, because the escrow can be utilized in various transactions like mergers and acquisitions, not only real estate. It can be used in intellectual property transfer and any other transaction that requires two parties coming together to transact, where you need the comfort of a third party. So that you always need an escrow in those kind of situations. So it's not just limited to the real estate environment. Also, there's a misconception about the escrow not necessary when trust is already established. Now, you can say that, oh, I trust this party, and then we can just go ahead with the transaction without the escrow agent. Now, that is a misconception, because we know that trust can be breached. But of course, where you have an unbiased third party coming into the picture, it gives you additional layer of comfort, that helps you to mitigate the risk of breach in trust. Also, the escrow, there's a misconception about the cost of the escrow being too expensive. Now, it's important that you know that for the prices that you are being charged for the escrow, it eventually, when you look at it from the perspective of where there's a breach in trust and the losses that parties can incur, as a result of those breach, you discover that the fees that the escrow agent would have requested of you wouldn't have been anything compared to the amount that you would be losing where there's a breach of trust. Now, other misconceptions around the size of the transaction, the misconception around escrow being relevant only on large transactions, the escrow being agent only able to handle money. It's not only monies that escrow agents are able to handle, and also that escrow agents can provide legal advice. It's important to know that the role of the escrow agent may not necessarily be to provide a legal advice. They can only offer some form of advice and refer you to legal persons who would give you proper legal advice. But the escrow agent in itself are not there to provide you with legal advice. So it's important that is noted, especially when entering into an escrow agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muyiwa. Very apt response. Now I want us to dive into some stories. I mean, the importance of stories cannot be overemphasized. We need real life examples from yourself and Shei on how the escrow agent was beneficial in resolving disputes on transactions, because we've been talking about an escrow, providing that security on business transactions. So we'll be going into real life examples right now. Starting with you, Shei. Please, can you give us a real life example?
Thank you, Tim Soper. Okay, so the real life example I'll be giving involved Stanbic IBTC trustees acting as escrow agents in a joint venture arrangement. We had a landowner and we had a developer, and the project span was to be for 2 years, where the landowner had given us his title document to hold, and the developer was meant to come in to develop the land and building properties. And so it happened that a period of 2 years had passed, and a rightful landowner, in the sense that we didn't have or didn't give us his property document, would have come to say, please, can I have my documents? Because you are not even working according to the terms. You are not doing what 2 years have passed. This development has not even reached middle stage, not in the test of the completion stage. So what we had to do at that time was to arrange for an all parties meeting between the parties, the JV developer and the landowner came in to talk about what the resolutions would be, either to extend the project, and then which would involve still extending the custody period with which the escrow agent would hold the documents for. And this will also come at an extra cost, but we're able to mediate and resolve the conflicts that arose at that time. Thank you, Tim Tokwe.
Thank you very much, Shei. So now we're going to take another real life example from Muyiwa. Muyiwa, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Temitope, and thank you, Shei, for that example. Also, I think another real life example that we can actually relate with is an instance where you had two parties. It's a real estate transaction. But at the point of the transaction, the seller did not disclose certain defects on the property to the buyer. And so they had gone into the arrangement, and then they were already concluding. However, at the point of completing payment, the buyer discovered that there were certain defects on the property, which could have actually affected the value of this property, and then that tension started to heighten, and then there was threat of legal action and all that. However, when the escrow agent came into the situation, they were able to mitigate between the two parties, and then they were able to come to a common terms where, it was easy for them to understand the perspective that both parties were coming from, and they were able to resolve the issue amicably within themselves. So that is actually a real life situation where the escrow came to bear, and not necessarily allowing the transacting parties to get to the level of taking legal action. And of course, we know how that can span into months, and so yeah, that's an example as well.
Okay, thank you. You've heard it from the experts. Those are real life examples where the escrow agent was there as an intermediary and as an independent intermediary to resolve disputes between parties in an escrow arrangement. So I just want to encourage us to start putting our questions in the chat box. I can see that some questions have already been dropped in the chat box. Please drop your questions and comments in the chat box, and we'll take them during our Q&A session. Now, moving on to the next question. This is for you, Shei. What measures does Stanbic IBTC trustees have in place to ensure the security and integrity of funds held in escrow? Shei, over to you.
Thank you, Temitope, for that question. That's an important question. So measures in place to ensure the integrity of funds held in escrow accounts include, we have validation and approvals in place around opening accounts, escrow accounts at the bank. We cannot just open an escrow account. We need to obtain necessary approvals, and then we can go about opening the escrow account and notifying the clients about the escrow account details. There are also instructions as contained in the agreement with regards to the release of funds and the investment of funds. So you cannot just say, because I'm holding the escrow funds, these are the things I'm going to do around the escrow funds. You have to stick to the escrow agreement and the terms or conditions that have been put in place. If it says invest in money markets, that's what you should do. If it says release the fund at this time, these are the things that you should do as an escrow agent. Then we also have the receipt of approval from the escrow parties. Before we release funds, the agreement states, for example, that we must obtain written agreements from the escrow parties. We have to work in line with the instructions received from the escrow parties before we release funds or take out funds for whatever purpose or disburse the funds. We also have the verification of specimen signature. So even if you have received an instruction from the escrow parties, we usually collect specimen signature verification cards or documents from the parties during the onboarding stage to say that these are the persons that will be representing these parties. So you need to verify and validate that these instructions are also coming from the parties. Lastly, we report funds transferred in line with anti-money laundering regulations. So we have reportings that we do in forms of suspicious transactions, foreign transfer, currency reporting, and all those things in line with anti-money laundering regulations. So you cannot be transferring amounts or releasing funds without also reporting, because your regulators will also frown or can pick something, and you also don't want to get any penalty or fine while transacting or offering your services, rendering your services. Thank you very much, Tim Tokwe.
Thank you, Sheyi. I know we've spoken about real estate transactions and how an escrow can be beneficial on those transactions. But can you talk about, businesses or industries that can benefit the most from escrow transactions, from escrow services on transactions? Muyiwa, this question is for you.
Okay, thank you very much, Temtope. Like we have said from the beginning on the importance of escrow, every business that actually involves a third party, and requires some level of comfort needs an escrow. So that's just basically what it is. Every business that involves a counterparty and requires some level of trust in transacting needs an escrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Muyiwa. Okay, so let's now move on to the regulatory environment. How does the current regulatory environment impact the use of escrow services, and how does Stanbic IBTC trustees stay compliant with the relevant regulations? This question is for you, Sheyi.
Yes, thank you again, Temitope, for this question. This is another important question. How does the regulatory environment impact the use of escrow services? Firstly, we are regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the licensing of trust companies to even provide such services is part of how the regulatory environment impacts the use of escrow services. I don't think any party would want to come in to do business with just any kind of organization. At least it would be a reputable one and one that has been licensed to carry out such services. Secondly, is that we act as a reputable trust company. Stanbic IBTC trustees is already licensed to do this and will hold documents in line with what it has been licensed to do. So we also have regulations and guidelines from various regulators that guide the operations of what we do as a reputable company. So this also comes into impact the escrow services we offer. The other thing I want to talk about is that there are also general regulations around conducting due diligence, for example. So it helps us to also stay compliant with relevant regulations. Another thing we do as an organization for us at Stanbic IBTC Trust is that we ensure compliance with all relevant regulations around our operations. There are compliance frameworks, there are compliance trainings that staff go through, there are policies and structures put in place. In fact, we have compliance teams that we could also run things with or, ask questions or seek clarifications from in line we carry out our services so that we ensure that we are seen as compliant in all that we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sheyi. Like Sheyi has said, we're a very compliant organization, and we ensure that everything that we're doing is in line with the regulations and the rules. Now, for the next question, Muyiwa, this is for you. As the Nigerian business landscape evolves, what trends do you foresee in the demand of escrow services, and how is the business positioned to meet this evolving need? Over to you, Muyiwa.
Thank you very much, Temitope. In our environment, we have seen the benefits of the escrow service, and we can see that this service has not been fully adopted. Now, due to the emergence of the metropolitan cities that we see around us, a lot of real estate companies are emerging, and there are several deals within that space. It's important that we consider the service of a good escrow agent or a company to secure the interest of the beneficiaries. Also, a lot of Nigerians currently who have left the shores of the country are looking back home to see how they can invest. And a lot of them actually are considering investment in the real estate space. So with the escrow service actually comes as an agent where that gives some level of trust, to these people who are not in the country but willing to send some money home to develop real estate properties and all that. Now, the location of the Stanbic IBTC as a trust company, is strategically located in the area of its relationship with its international affiliation with the Standard Bank, of course, and then the relationship we have with sister companies like the Stanbic banks, the asset managers, insurance, and all that. It helps us to strategically locate ourselves in areas where we know that some of these deals are going on, and they close out deals in these areas, and so we're able to take the market, and provide this service that gives the comfort that people require, so that we don't run into a chaos where there's a lot of disputes around, I sent some monies back home. What I was told I would get is not what I got. You've seen stories around people sending monies for a duplex in Banana Island, and when they come back, you take them to a shanty somewhere and say, well, that is what the money could afford. Of course, in an escrow transaction, there's no room for that, because what you actually paid for, what you agreed for, is what you would get. And then also beyond the real estate sector, the evolution of industries and through mergers and acquisitions also helps us to be major industry players in that area, because like I said, it involves closing of deals. So, and then once it involves two parties coming in to close a deal, we come in very handy to be able to provide that escrow service, and then it improves the confidence that people have in the industry to be able to go into these mergers and acquisitions, and even intellectual property transfer. So those are the areas where we have strategically located ourselves, to be able to ensure that this service is, we push out this service out there. And of course, this webinar is also one of them, to enlighten of escrow and why they need to consider Stanbic IBTC as a brand to be their escrow agent when they are entering into transactions that requires a third party that would give them comfort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mira, for that very detailed response. So we'll be moving into the Q&A session. I can see some questions in the chat box. Please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, We'll be going through the questions one by one. Okay, first question here. Must the parties to an escrow reside locally? Shay, do you want to take this question?
Thank you, Tim Tokwe. The parties to an escrow party don't have to reside locally. We've had transactions where one of the party was here and one of the party was abroad or offshore. So they don't both have to be here. And if they are both here, it makes things easier where there are disputes or there's a conflict that needs to be resolved on time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Shay. The next question I have here is a long question, but we'll take it. How do you handle milestone transactions? For instance, if I get a contractor to build a house and he requires an advance, I pay the advance, but he fails to deliver, how would an escrow mitigate such a default from happening? Is it possible to retrieve funds committed, or would it be considered a loss? Okay, Muyiwa, do you want to take that?
Yes, thank you very much, Tope. So, in a situation where you have this buyer-seller situation, depending on what the escrow arrangement is, there are instances where you are paying a developer to develop properties, and which means that you'll be inflowing monies into an escrow account, some of which the agreement would allow for the escrow agent or the developer to be able to draw down and then make the development. But of course, you should also realize that the developer has committed something into the escrow. We have the property, the title document of the property that the development is taking place on. And so because the agreement is for us to disburse funds for the purpose of that development, you are safe in the sense that even if nothing can happen, that property cannot be sold because we will be holding the properties to the document to that property. So, and of course, we also have certain commitments that all the developers would have entered into, such that they are until they fulfill those terms and conditions, we are not able to release the property documents to any of the parties. So if the monies have been committed and then the developer has not utilized it in the way they need to utilize it, we are there to, as escrow agent, to be able to monitor and ensure that things are done the right way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Muyiwa. Another question here. What I have here is, how do you handle arbitration? Interesting. Do you use in-house arbitrators or outsource? Can you describe your arbitration process? Just to point out that the escrow agent is not an arbitrator, but I'll allow Shay to take this question. Shay, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timitope. Yes, we are not arbitrators. So, but as escrow agents, like we rightly said, we are middlemen, and when we have conflicts in an escrow transaction or arrangement, the escrow agreement actually contains clauses around what to do when there's a conflict or a dispute. So we act or we go in line with what the clause has said we should do. For example, it might mean setting up an all parties meeting for all the parties to explain what has happened or express their disappointment and what needs to be done. And then we take minutes of what has happened and provide resolutions and timelines on what to be done and what we'll be doing. And if it means even making further amendments to the agreement, we'll actually have to do that too, or have some additional agreements to ensure that whatever the objective of the escrow agreement is, it is actually concluded within given timeline. So arbitration process, I would say, in relation to this question of describing everything, it will be that in line with whatever the clause in the escrow agreement has given or stated that we do. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Shay. The other question I have here is, please, can you give us an overview again on the subject matter? Okay, we'll give you an overview, but it's going to be a brief overview. After this session, you can also go to our social media, YouTube. You'll be able to watch a catch-up video of this session and take all the information that you need from that. But we'll give you a brief overview again. Muyiwa, please, if you can take this very quickly. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Oh, apologies. Thank you very much, Temitope. So, like we have mentioned at the beginning of the session, the webinar is the importance of escrow in transacting with different parties, is the additional comfort that the escrow agent provides to the transacting parties. Now, it's important to note that the escrow agent is a neutral third party that gives some level of comfort and security, to parties coming into a business or an arrangement. So, when you are engaging in any kind of business enterprise, as long as you have another party or a counterparty in that transaction, and you need some level of comfort to be able to ensure that the agreement between you and the other party is adhered to strictly, then you need an escrow, basically.
Okay, thank you very much, Muyiwa. The next question that I have here is, how do we verify the authenticity of an escrow agreement? Okay, supposing the other party is a foreign company or organization. Shay, do you want to take this?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Temitope. I will take it. Okay, so the authenticity of an escrow agreement, wow, is such that when we are involved in an escrow transaction, we usually ask our parties or the clients, do you already have escrow agreements in place, draft escrow agreements? Because we don't work without lawyers on this kind of arrangement on transactions. If they have, they give to us. We review, our legal team also review the transactions. We ask questions and we say, what is this transaction about? We ask for documents. And I spoke earlier about the area of due diligence and, asking questions and ensuring that you receive relevant responses to the details that have been put in an agreement. Another thing we do is to even draft the agreement through our legal team. And that gives us more comfort because our legal team would have spotted all the clauses and made known to us areas that we should be very wary of, or we should look more importantly into. So those are some of the things we do and that contributed to the authenticity of the escrow agreements. The escrow agreements can be drafted either from the party or through our legal team. It is reviewed, and before it is executed or signed, parties would have met at some point in time, either before the point of appointment or after the point of appointment, and representatives of the parties would have been introduced. So you have to know yourselves. Obviously, we are providing comfort, and because we are providing that protection for all parties, we must have met each other and known each other, the representatives, so that at the point of executing, representatives are executing and assuring themselves that this transaction will go in line with whatever agreements that have been reached or made. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Shay. Interesting questions. Keep them coming, please. Next question is, what is the difference between a broker and an escrow agent? Muyiwa, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So for a broker, we know that a broker acts as a representative of either the buyer or the seller, but for an escrow agent, the escrow agent is a neutral third party. It doesn't have any vested interest in the transaction. So what they try to do is to ensure that both parties who are into that transaction actually transact seamlessly without being biased towards either of the parties. But of course, you know that for a broker, they are either tilted towards the buyer or the seller.